checkpoints on several main roads today, searching vehicles for protesters allegedly involved in the recent anti-government demonstrations. This past week has seen violent protests sparked by a hefty fuel price increase. A stay away was called by the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. Authorities have been accused of using excessive force and violating human rights by shutting down internet access. Activists interested in the situation in Zimbabwe have shown their anger demonstrating outside Zimbabwe embassies here in South Africa and in other parts of the world. And joining me now via Skype from Washington in the United States is author and columnist Pearl Matibe, who herself has experienced some of the Zimbabwean authorities and just how they deal with dissenting voices. A very good evening to you, Pearl. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Globe. First of all, you one of those Zimbabweans who experienced state violence in that country before. Can you help us and our viewers perhaps make sense of it all from your personal experiences?
Thank you. First of all, good evening to you. It is good afternoon here in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for inviting me onto your show. So in Zimbabwe, in the around the early 2002s, I did experience personally state-sponsored violence during the farm invasions. My family lived on an 1,100-acre farm. That's about 445-hectare tobacco farm. We farmed many other crops, and our farm was seized, and I went through a significant amount of state-sponsored violence.
All right. Is it as bad as it's being suggested?
I would put it this way. Because of the early indications of a systemic ongoing opposition, I dispute the claim that the ruling ZANU-PF government of 1983 was going after dissidents. Because take a look at what's going on at the moment. I am seeing several parallels. Let me explain why. The truth is, back in 1983, they hoped to defend and decimate ZAPU, which was the opposition party at the time, and its followers. My personal encounters with ZANU-PF, I also see denial. Because with Gukurahundi, Robert Mugabe denied early on, while it was unfolding, that anything was even taking place. If you take a look at the farm invasions, again, early on, George Charamba denied even being aware of my family's farm being seized. He also claimed that the farmers were just exaggerating and manipulating the situation, and yet farm invasions were in fact happening. So you see several parallels. Take a look now what's happening with the protests. It's the same level of violence. Take a look at what happened over the 1st August shootings. The same thing has been happening repetitively over a long period of time, from Gukurahundi to the farm invasions to August 1 killings to the protests, the same stamp.
So, Pearl, as a woman who is also a woman in the diaspora, how then do you participate in the various conversations affecting your country? I
can tell you that I am in contact with many, many people on the ground. There are people who have been wounded, have been admitted into Belvedere Medical Center. There is a woman actually who was beaten. They were using electrical cables. And I am also involved in, participating in the conversation all across the world, because the diaspora is a very, very important part of Zimbabwe's development. So what should be happening next is that there needs to be some dialogue. But before even we get to dialogue, there needs to be a huge push to ask the World Economic Forum to rescind President Mnangagwa's invitation to the World Economic Forum. He needs to return home, fix things, be responsive to the people's needs, initiate sincere, genuine dialogue with all stakeholders, and those stakeholders must include the diaspora and the diaspora women. For Zimbabwe to go forward.
Yeah. You've just included, you've just talked about some of the international engagements like the World Economic Forum. But then I want to know from you, Pearl, if you get the sense that the Zimbabwe, under the leadership of President Emmerson Mnangagwa, is getting the same kind of attention compared to his predecessor, former President Robert Mugabe, from the international community.
Absolutely. If you take a look at what is happening right now with the U.S.-Africa policy, the White House did approve just before we went into the Christmas holidays a new Africa strategy. The essence of that strategy is that it offers African countries a choice to either solidify your ties with Russia and China or with the US. It's almost as if it's an indication of they have to choose. If you take a look at President Mnangagwa's trip, that was a 5-nation trip, which began with Moscow, a big indication that he is solidifying ties with the Near East, with Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan. That is not the narrative that you would look to if you are hoping, for instance, for sanctions in Zindera to be coming to an end.
And the new Africa strategy issued by the White House, how do you think it'll impact on the lives of Zimbabweans?
I think that it would impact the lives of Zimbabweans because the push is also that if Zimbabwe was to begin dialogue, initiate dialogue that is inclusive of all stakeholders, and like I want to keep mentioning, diaspora women ought to be included at every step of the decision-making process, because Ivanka Trump is a personal advisor to President Donald Trump. And just this January, important legislation was passed which will empower women. It's these types of developments that will have a significant effect in empowering women in Zimbabwe. Towards the end of last year, in October, the White House and the US Congress also passed the BUILD Act. These are all important pieces of reform that the United States government is putting in place. It almost forces Zimbabwe to begin to have and implement structural reforms. Without significant structural reforms and without demonstrating that they are serious, there's some key things that the Mnangagwa-led government could already be doing right now to show an indication to the West that they are serious. But it does not seem at the moment that there is the political will to do so. But there is a political will, it seems, for him to, solidify the ties with Russia and the deals that we see him signing over the last few days.
When he took up office, his leadership was met with so much fanfare and renewed optimism and the hope that Zimbabwe will become a better place for all Zimbabweans. But he also promised them milk and honey. But then it appears that he's now failing to put on the table all those promises that he made upon taking his oath of office. What do you think is next for Zimbabwe?
What is next? Zimbabwe cannot move forward without dialogue. That is an unavoidable truth. And the sooner the ruling party, you see, the people that have to initiate dialogue has to be President Mnangagwa and not the other stakeholders. You know why? Because he is the sitting head of state. Any head of state that takes office should hope and work to unite a country and leave it more united than when you took office. So I would estimate, and it is my analysis, that President Mnangagwa will be judged by what he fails to do.
All right, Pearl, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate your time. Well, that was our author and columnist Pearl Matibe speaking to us via Skype from Washington, D.C. This is the Global SABC News. Let's take a short break.